All right, back on the Young Turks. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur. J.R. Jackson's producing, Jesus Godoy is directing. All right, now, I remember when Alan Grayson said Republicans want you to die quickly. That's their plan for health care reform. Now, he was referring to the Republicans being standard bearers for what the health care insurance companies want to do, and that they're basically in the back pockets of the lobbyists, and they agree with everything that the health care insurance industry has pushed and fought against, and that the industry generally wants you to die quickly so they don't have to pay as much money. Now, of course, he took a lot of heat for that, but we see the story of Ian Pearl now, and you begin to realize, well, maybe he's not that far off. See, Ian has muscular dystrophy, and back when he was born in 1972, they didn't give him much of a chance of survival, certainly for very long. But he's a fighter, so he fought, and he went to high school. He was, in fact, voted the president of his high school, and he leads a perfectly functional life up into this very moment. No thanks to the healthcare insurance companies and the one that covers him. For him to survive, he needs a machine to breathe through and round-the-clock nursing care, so he can't do it by himself. That seems fairly obvious, right? And luckily for him, his dad had worked at a company where they had Guardian life insurance, and they covered home nursing care, and they did not have a permanent cap on lifetime coverage. So perfect. He had insurance. He needed insurance, his dad, right, for the son that he wound up having with some health issues. And that's why you buy insurance. Everything worked out just right. Of course, until Guardian decided, we got to get rid of this guy, and we got to get rid of people like him. Now, that seems harsh. How do we know that? Well, what Ian did when they tried to drop him was he did a lawsuit. Because they didn't just drop him. They all of a sudden changed the plan. And they announced to everybody, oh, by the way, the plan that you bought and that you paid for all these years is no longer the same plan. Now, we don't have nursing home care, and we don't have no permanent cap. We do have a permanent cap. It's a weird way I just said that. But in other words, we're going to cap your expenses, and then that's it. So if this actually applied to Ian, they would literally take his breathing device away because it costs too much, and they would not provide him a nurse, and he would die. He would die. Okay, now, even as I say it, it sounds like, well, I mean, that sounds like it's a bit much. But if you don't let the guy breathe, he will die. I mean, I'm not trying to demagogue the issue. That's just the fact of Ian's situation, right? And it costs a lot of money. And again, that's why you buy insurance. And his family doesn't have anywhere near the money needed to keep him alive. Now, maybe, I don't know, Republicans in the healthcare industry think, well, then, sad day for him. Take him off the thing and let him die. But I thought they were pro-life. I was pretty sure that they were pro-life and that they were concerned about death panels, right? So how did we find out what Guardian life insurance company actually thinks? Well, in the lawsuit, they found internal memos. And the memos describe people like Ian, including specifically Ian, as and patients that have muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, brain injury, and paralysis. They describe them as, quote, dogs and train wrecks. And they tried to figure out a way to get rid of them, to dump them from coverage because they were too costly. Well, you could understand because Guardian, was in a lot of trouble and they weren't making a profit. Oh, wait a minute. Turns out they were. In the year 2008, as they're doing this to Ian Pearl, Guardian reported $7.5 billion in revenue, net profit of $437 million. Could they afford to pay the insurance that they were supposed to pay, according to their contract? Yes, for Ian and for everybody else, and they would still make a profit. But they wanted a bigger profit. And, $437 million just wasn't enough. And you know how little capital they had left in 2008? They only had $4.3 billion left in capital. Could they afford to pay for Ian Pearl as they promised his parents when they did the contract and as they promised all their insurance holders? Yes, they definitely could afford it. They just didn't want to because they were dogs and train wrecks, and they wanted to dump them so they could make more money. Now, if you trust your private insurance to look out for your best interest, well, you're just not paying attention. That's not how it works. Capitalism has wonderful parts to it, but we have to understand how it works, what the motivations are, what the incentives are. And do we want to apply it to certain life and death situations? Do we want to apply it to your local fire department where they say, well, you know what? We didn't make enough of a profit this year. If we had made $500 million instead of $400 million, maybe we wouldn't let those people burn to death. But it just didn't make sense for us to cover that fire. It cost too much. 12 people burned alive in it. Who cares? We made a bigger profit. Now, we don't allow that. That's not how we do it, right? We have to ask the government to do it because there are some things the government does better and some things that the private sector does better, right? Now, you can still make an argument that the private sector does this better, but can we at least not have can we at least have a choice and say, hey, you know what? What if I bought a public option where I pay my premiums and the government says, you know what? I'm not going to let you die. I'm going to honor my contracts. And since I don't have to make these obscene profits, it's actually going to cost less for you. It's going to be what it's supposed to be. Insurance. You know, we all pay into it, and then if somebody needs it and needs care that costs a lot of money, well, that's where you get the money from. That's how insurance is supposed to work. Look, we just did the story of the little girl, Aislinn Bates, 2 years old. The insurance company says she's too skinny. We did the story of baby Alex. He's 4 months old. They say he's too fat. So they're not going to cover your babies if they're too skinny or they're too fat. They're not going to cover you if you're too sick, or you might potentially get sick, or if you're, in another story we did, if your mom was sick. If your mom had breast cancer, they're not going to cover you because your mom's pre-existing condition. They're not going to cover you if they find out later that you had acne, but now you have cancer while you didn't report your acne. They're looking for every possible way to not cover you. You know why? Because then they make more money. Duh. Okay, that's the incentive system that we have set up. And you could even make an argument, don't hate the player, hate the game. Well, I do hate the game. That's why we want to change it, so that American people have a real option for real insurance that does cover them. How could you look at all these stories and still say, nope, I think private insurance is on top of it. And I am positive that if I get sick, they'll cover me. If you think that, you really don't understand anything about how the system is set up, how capitalism works, what the motivations of these companies are, what their fiduciary responsibility is. Their responsibility to their shareholders is to cover as little people as possible, and that means you, and to take as much money from you as possible. If you like this system, you just don't understand how the world works. You're going to get hosed in a big way, then you're going to come crying later. But then it's going to be too late. Well, one of the reasons that it's going to be too late and the reason that it's taking so long is because according to Roll Call that covers Capitol Hill, the Republicans do have a strategy for healthcare reform. And they're amazing because some of them, in quotes, sometimes it's the aides, sometimes it's the senators, directly tell you. Their strategy is, do they have a plan? Of course not. Don't be silly, of course not. Their strategy is, let's delay it as much as possible in the hope that it doesn't get done. Stay classy, Republicans. And so what they want to do is not just filibuster the overall bill to delay it and hopefully kill it, but they have a new strategy, which is to filibuster every single amendment. Not because they even think that they're going to win those filibusters on those amendments, and they might win on some. But no, their real point is, if we grind this thing to a halt, it'll get so damn slow that nothing gets done. Now, the Washington Post just did a poll, and this is, told you about a different poll yesterday. They have new record lows for the GOP. 20% of Americans saying that they identify themselves as Republicans. It hasn't been that low in 26 years, okay? 20%. You know why you're losing the whole country, the Republicans? Because we live in a democracy, and you don't give a damn about people. That usually doesn't work. I mean, yeah, you can fool some of the people some of the time, from what I hear. But you can't fool all the people all the time, and that's what you're trying to do. You think you can fool everybody into thinking that, that you're on their side while you take the money from all these corporations and do their bidding? Well, they're kind of on to you now. This is sick stuff, man. It really is. So their great strategy is delay, delay, delay until we can kill this thing. And almost every Republican senator is going to be on board, and they're going to throw one filibuster after another at you. And they admit it. They say, we don't have the votes. We can't possibly win, but we're dying to stop this health care reform, and we don't have an alternative plan, and we will not be proposing an alternative plan. All we want to do is slow it down so that it takes so damn long that people give up. Okay, stay classy. So now let's go to one of those Republican senators, John Kyle. Again, this goes to Grayson's point of, do they want people to die quickly? Well, he takes on, he's going to talk to David Gregory and Meet the Press. First, Gregory's going to ask him a very good question on always having the money for wars. Then he's going to get to Grayson's point. I have a lot to say about this, but let's watch the clip first. Clip number 1.
You know, it's interesting, Senator Kyle, in that vein, in terms of this kind of moral imperative. You and other Republicans have said this health care reform should be opposed, and one of the major reasons you cite is how much money it costs, how much it could potentially add to the deficit, although the president says it'll be deficit neutral. And yet, when you talk about the war in Afghanistan and that the commander should have more of their troops, I've never heard you say that that should be deficit neutral, that war costs should somehow not break the bank. Why is that disparity there?
David, no country can afford to scrimp and save or try to win a war on the cheap. The president himself has said that the war in Afghanistan against these terrorists who killed over 3,000 Americans on September 11, 2001, is a war of necessity. You have to win it. And Americans throughout our history have sacrificed when war has called for us to do that.
And is it a necessity to tackle the fact that there are more and more Americans who die because they don't have access to health insurance?
I'm not sure that it's a fact that more and more people die because they don't have health insurance, but because they don't have health insurance, the care is not delivered in the best and most efficient way.
Yeah, no, you see, if you don't have health insurance and you get sick, a natural consequence is death. But I'm not just saying that. There's a Harvard study that was recently released saying that 45,000 Americans die each year because they lack access to health insurance, and that uninsured Americans are 40% more likely to die than Americans who are insured. So if you don't have insurance, you're 40% more likely to die, and people who don't have it, 45,000 of them die every single year. So is health insurance a matter of life and death? Of course it is. But notice that even though they yelled at Grayson and they said, bad boy, you've been uncivil, right? All of a sudden, he changed the conversation, he introduced that question, and David Gregory is basically asking that same question on Meet the Press to a Republican senator. Alan Grayson, mission accomplished. Great job. That's how you change the conversation, and that's how you make him answer the question. Now, on to the first question that Gregory asked. How come you always have the money for wars? A question we've often asked, right? He says, no, you can't scrimp and save in wars. So you can scrimp and save with people's health insurance, or their health care, I should say. So it's just their lives. Oh, but you don't understand, 3,000 Americans died on September 11th. That's right, and that's terrible, and that's why we're there, and that's why I supported the Afghanistan war. Now, having said that, 45,000 people die every single year because they don't have health insurance. But we can scrimp and save with them, right? And then he said, oh, no, but the war was a necessity. So those people's lives and their health and their well-being is not a necessity. And he said, and in war, what can we do? We have to sacrifice. Oh, is that right? So because you want to conduct those wars, I assume, and you want to be revenue neutral, as you keep yelling and screaming about, I assume you want to raise taxes, right? Because you got to pay for the war somehow. Oh, you don't mean that by sacrifice. You mean sacrifice our troops and send them into that war, and let alone the Iraq war, where you sacrifice them thousands at a time for that senseless war. If you're an American taxpayer and you think these Republicans have your best interest in mind, you're crazy, nuts, okay? And the other crazy part of this is, on every single issue, I still keep an open mind. Like the New Jersey governor's race, I just started paying attention to it a couple of days ago. And I literally, I didn't know, because it's a governor's race. It could be, that you got a totally reasonable Republican on the state level that's not going to affect any of these national issues. In fact, in Utah, they had a very conservative Republican governor, and I used to praise him all the time. Huntsman is a reasonable guy. You could disagree, but a legitimate, reasonable guy. And then he's now our ambassador to China for the Obama administration. So, and there are reasonable Republicans. And then, of course, I turned to the New Jersey governor's race, And it turns out the guy is one of the U.S. attorneys that Karl Rove installed. And he's just like Rove wanted. He started an investigation of Senator Menendez right before the election. And it turns out, either, everywhere you look, the Republican Party has these scumbags. I mean, they've infiltrated the whole party and taken it over. I'm desperately looking for some decent guys that you can disagree with, but they're decent guys, and most importantly, have real, genuine beliefs. Like, hey, this is how we think the country is going to be better off. You can disagree, but I really believe that the country and the American taxpayers and our citizens are going to be better off this way. They are few and far between in the Republican Party. And so Chris Christie in New Jersey turns out to be another one of those guys. There's 100 different controversies surrounding him now, and he had a big lead because they had issues in New Jersey with taxes, et cetera, with Corzine. But now he's squandered the lead because it turns out he's just as bad as any other Republican. And in New Jersey, although they desperately want to change, they don't want to change to a guy like that, and that's what the whole Republican Party is these days. So, all right, now, when we come back, let's hit Obama, because real lack of leadership here. We'll talk about it when we return. Young Turks. Back on the Young Turks. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur. Now, let's go to the Obama White House and ask the question what a lot of Democratic aides and senators are asking on Capitol Hill right now. What the hell is he up to? Right now, we're in the middle of the health care reform debate. It couldn't be more important because Harry Reid is deciding what to put in the bill, the final version of the Senate bill, and he gets to make that decision, and he's going to do it based on the pressure put on the Senate Democrats one way or another. And now aides and senators are looking around going, where the hell's Obama? Let me give you direct quotes. Here's a senior Democratic aide. Quote, there's a clear sense that it would be helpful, referring to Obama's getting involved in this debate and pressuring some senators to go along with a public option, for example. He continues, quote, throughout this entire debate, the White House line has been, we will weigh in when it is necessary. Well, now we need 60 votes. So if it's not necessary now, when will it be? That's an excellent question. Then another quote from that same aide. I think folks in general in Congress were looking to the president to clearly define his feeling on the issue. I'm sorry, this is a different aide, another senior aide in Congress. And he said, quote, and I don't think he has done that on the public option from the get-go. With a lot of senators nervous because of elections or other political dynamics, it would be helpful for the president to send a strong signal that this is what he wants in the final bill. Very, very fair. Look, you talked about, oh, I want the public option, I'd like the public option, la, 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 but, we'll see how it goes. Well, right now is how it's going. You got to make the decision right now. And you have to pressure the other senators, otherwise they're not going to do it. And they're looking for your leadership. Here, let me give you more quotes. Here's Senator Ben Cardin on the record from Maryland saying, quote, it's not in his DNA, referring to Obama, it's not in his DNA to do the prescriptive lobbying on the details here, and I'm not going to try to change his style at this stage. We'll take what he certainly made it clear he wants this bill done, and people are sitting in all the meetings. He's saying it's not in his DNA to come and actually, he's got carrots, but he doesn't have sticks, to come there and pressure the senators to go along with his plan, the plan that he claims that he wants, right? And so we're looking for Lyndon Johnson. You know how Lyndon Johnson would say, hey, you got to be with the president. You could call people in the middle of the night. He talked to them about fundraising for them or not fundraising for them. He talked to them about their political career. So far, apparently, Obama White House, MIA, missing in action. Sanders says, look, this is all about getting the Democrats on board to not join a Republican filibuster. That's all we need from them. We don't even need these people that are in the middle that don't love the public option to vote for it. Just say, hey, you know what? Since I'm in the Democratic caucus, I won't be joining a Republican filibuster. And there we have good news. Listen to this. Mary Landrieu, one of the people who has said on the record that she's against the public option, Democrat of Louisiana, said, quote, I am not right now inclined to support any filibuster. That's great news. So she's not going to join the Republicans in a filibuster. That gets you a hell of a lot closer to 60. And she's one of the most, conservative ones. And she says, quote, for the Republican Party to kind of step out of the game is very unfortunate. I'm not going to be joining people that don't want progress. We're almost there, Obama. You got to step in. You got to pressure the couple of people left. Now, here's Ben Nelson, another guy who's not been in favor of the public option. He's been back and forth, but it doesn't look good that he's going to vote for it. But we don't need his damn vote. All we need him is to do not join the Republicans in killing it, right? And when asked about it, Nelson said, quote, I believe in playing chess, but that's about 3 moves ahead of me, and I'm not prepared to make those moves until I see some other moves in between. Now, look, Ben Nelson's not a dummy. He knows how the filibuster works. It's not 3 moves ahead, right? It's right there. We saw it 6 months ago. That's why we started talking about it on the show. First thing I said was we just need the Democrats not to join a Republican filibuster. Then Bernie Sanders came out and started talking about it, and we called it the Sanders rule, senator from Vermont. Everybody gets it, right? By Ben Nelson saying, I just need to see some other moves in between, he's almost asking the president, will you please come and pressure me? And if he doesn't do it, then it's going to be Obama's fault. This is there for the taking. If he cared about the public option at all, this is the time, and he can do it. But the quotes from the administration are not positive. When asked about it, Robert Gibbs said, quote, I think the folks on Capitol Hill, based on the speech that the president gave on Capitol Hill, know where he stands. Schwang, wang, wang, Debbie Schlussel. That is terrible quote. Basically, I don't know, we gave a speech on it a couple of months ago, and yeah, I guess they know where we stand, don't we? First of all, that speech was purposely vague. You didn't say if you were going to insist on the public option, and you've been saying all along that you won't draw a line in the sand. So I don't know, maybe that's not vague. Maybe it's his way of saying, no, we don't want the public option. How much clearer did we need to be? And so we're not going to pressure those senators because we don't want it. I mean, what else can I assume? So now, look, you want more? Let's go to Axelrod and Rahm Emanuel. Clip number 2 is going to have their reaction, and they came out on Sunday, and they've still got this wishy-washy talk, and it's still terrible. And then when we come back from that, I'm going to talk to you about a really surprising, strong Democratic senator and the difference he's making. But let's watch this first.
The president has made it clear throughout the process, he said it in his speech before Congress, that he thinks that the public option is a right solution. He thinks it will enhance competition, and he thinks it'll reduce costs, and it'll give people choices. And he said that throughout the process.
As you saw, the president said in the joint session to Congress, he believed a public option is important to competition.
Look, the president has very consistently and clearly articulated his support for a public option.
If you don't have competition, an insurance company has the run of not only premiums, what type of health care you have. And so the president believes in it as a source of competition.
He supports that, but that doesn't mean that we halt the process. There are people in the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, who have objections to that. We have to work through these issues.
He also believes that is not the defining piece of health care. It is whether we achieve both cost control, coverage, as well as the choice that is essential.
For the president?
The president of the United States will obviously weigh in when it's important to weigh in on that.
So he's a big believer.
Now,
what I'm asking is, will he push for it and demand it here as in the final version of reform?
He's pushed for it, certainly, but he's also realistic to say we've got to look at all options. He has said very clearly he thinks it's the best option, and we'll see what happens.
So he's not demanding that it's in there?
He's not demanding that it's in there. He thinks it's the best possible choice.
But you can't say today that the final bill that the president will sign must include a public option as called for by House Democrats.
I think the final bill will achieve those goals. I believe that there is a fundamental belief on the Hill at this time that we can't fail now. And I think that will overcome these differences. There will be compromise, there will be legislation, and it will achieve our goals.
There are key members of the Senate that want a public option. The Senator Snowe, who's also important, would like to see a trigger, but what is implicit in the notion of a trigger is that you should always have available that option of having a public plan to bring the type of competition that brings downward pressure on prices and price effect of healthcare costs.
I think we're letting hope get in the way of our judgment. They're being clear as they can be. They don't want it, right? I mean, you hear those clips. Oh, we like it, we like it. Will you insist on it? Nope. We'll see what the final version looks like. No, but this is the final version. If you want it, you have to insist on it now. And we know in politics, if you don't insist on something, of course you're not going to get it. Nelson's asking you, please, will you pressure me? And they say, no, Landrieu's on board for not joining a Republican filibuster. It's easy at this point. But that White House doesn't want it. You can see it from every single clip there. Well, no, it's not necessary. You know, we want something like that, but not exactly that. No, it's not, no. And then at the end, Rahm Emanuel just said, yeah, trigger. Trigger is the Olympia Snow Republican idea. And it's not a version of public option, as he said. If that's what they're going to call a public option, that's not a public option. That's, hey, we'll come back to this issue 5 years from now. Oh, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. And then we'll debate it all over again. Oh, wow. Yeah. Thanks for doing us a favor. What the hell was this debate about? Okay? No, I'm hoping against hope that it's not the case. But if, as this Democratic aides on the Hill are saying, hey, if not now, when? And the answer is apparently never. That's what we have to conclude. I wish we didn't have to. Now the strong Democratic senator. We live in a funny, interesting world. You know who it is? Roland Burris. The guy who replaced Blago or was picked by Blago to replace Obama in Illinois. I mean, isn't that ironic? He's got Obama's old seat, and ironically, he's being much stronger than Obama. And he's got corruption issues, and he shouldn't come back, etc. But I'll tell you what, man, I look at this and I go, corrupt or not, all of a sudden we're having a conversation. You know why? He said, look, my voters could not have been clearer. And he knows he's not coming back to the Senate, right? So he's like, I got nothing to lose, and my voters are very clear on this. They say that they overwhelmingly want a public option. So if the bill doesn't have one in it, I'm voting against it. Okay. So now all of a sudden they're scrambling to try to get Roland Burris on board. And now all of a sudden they got a problem because they can't get to 60 without Roland Burris, right? And now they're looking to how to appease Roland Burris. Now, imagine if instead of just Roland Burris, there were 5 senators or 10 senators or 50 senators. And there are well over 50 senators who support the public option. If there were that many senators who said, oh yeah, you know what, Roland's got a pretty good idea, we insist on it, then it's over, okay? You're going to do it that way. Because if you got 52 guys, according to Tom Harkin's vote count, who absolutely want a public option, and you got 3 or 4 guys who are on the fence but not sure if they should join a Republican filibuster, guess who's going to win? The 52 are going to win. Their problem is that they're not insisting. The Republicans have no problem insisting, right? But this White House and so far the Democrats, other than Roland Burris, amazingly, are the ones that are not insisting. It's man, if when it's this easy they blow it, it will be profoundly disappointing. Let me give you one more clip. You want to talk about profoundly disappointing? Harry Reid. He's the guy who's going to decide, right? Does he want the public option? Let's listen to clip number 12. 12.
No, we'll see.
Are the negotiations leaning toward or against a public option at this point?
The negotiations are leaning about a public option.
Can you clarify?
Well, we're talking about...
What?
We didn't hear.
He said, are we leaning toward or against a public option? I said, we're leaning toward talking about a public option.
Wow.
Wow. No decision has been made. We had not a long discussion last night on public option. I've had a number of meetings in my office dealing with Democrats and Republicans on the public option aspect of it. And when the decision's made to send this on to the CBO, I will have made a decision as to what we're going to do with the public option. It's not done yet.
Does that inspire any confidence? I mean, is that the strong leadership you're looking for? Well, we're talking about it. Look, I get that he can't say anything about it now, right? I understand that. But that man oozes weakness. But the funny thing is, as I've said before, look, the bottom line is always results. If in the end he actually delivers a Senate version with a strong public option in it, then he wipes the slate clean. And all of a sudden I say, you know what? Turns out Harry Reid was an effective leader. So he still has that opportunity. Will he take it? It doesn't look good so far, but you never know. We hold out hope. We believe in hope. Good luck to us. When we come back, a former Republican, I don't know, I'm going to talk to him. He might still be a Republican. Worked for Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush. Not so happy with the direction of the party these days. We'll do that when we return. Young Turks.
Nothing.
Back on a Young Turks. Now, interesting conversation with Bruce Bartlett. He is a former domestic policy advisor to Ronald Reagan, Treasury official under President George H.W. Bush. He's been an economic historian and has worked in politics and public policy for 30 years now. And he's got a new book called The New American Economy, The Failure of Reaganomics and a New Way Forward. Uh-oh. Bruce, welcome to the Young Turks.
Happy to be here.
All right, so did you believe in Reaganomics when you worked for Reagan and then change your mind later?
No, actually, I think Reaganomics worked great in the 80s, and I still believe that what was done back then was right. I just don't think that the things that were done under George W. Bush were anything remotely like what Reagan's policies would have been. And I also don't think that those policies are necessarily what the economy needs today. I think the idea of cutting taxes more under current circumstances, it wouldn't do the slightest bit of good economically, and anybody who believes that, I think, is just reciting dogma and not analyzing the actual economy.
Bruce, you seem to be doing something radical that we've engaged in earlier, too, which is context. You know, people always say, the Republicans seem to have, you know, this mantra that you talk about, cut taxes, and I always ask, really when? You know, like, doesn't it depend on if the tax rate is at 70%, like when Reagan came into office, or if it's at 31%, like when Clinton came into office? Doesn't that make a difference as to when you should cut taxes?
Yep.
And what's the answer to that, and what's the numbers behind that?
Well, I just think that there's a lot of people in this world who feel that if they say something different under a different set of circumstances, that they'll be accused of flip-flopping. And a lot of people accuse me of flip-flopping, even though I haven't flip-flopped at all. I've merely analyzed circumstances and come to the conclusion that a set of policies that was appropriate under one set is inappropriate under a different set. That's not flip-flopping. That's just common sense.
Well, you know, it reminds me of the different foreign policies that the two Bushes had. George H.W. Bush was for a New World Order, where you do not launch preemptive strikes or first strikes against other countries. His son comes in and does the exact opposite. So then if you supported George H.W. Bush and you don't support George W. Bush, they'll accuse you of flip-flopping. But wait a minute, I'm the one who's consistent. You're the one who's flip-flopping, right? So it seems like so many people are stuck in this Republican or Democratic mold, and they can't get beyond it, and they can't think for themselves. But if you do think for yourself, on the issue of taxes, what are the conclusions that you drew? Because I'm really interested in the numbers. At what point does cutting taxes, in your opinion, work, and what point does it not work?
Well, it just depends. Depends on the context. I mean, I think that when we first started talking about cutting tax rates, taxes were vastly higher than they are now. The top rate went up to 70%. But most importantly, we were suffering from inflation, which pushes people up into higher tax brackets, so that there was a continuous tax increase going on day after day after day that was sapping incentives. It was, you know, whether it was right or wrong, was very common in the 1970s to hear people say, I'm not going to work overtime because it'll push me up into a higher tax bracket and I'll end up losing money. Of course, that was not actually true, but the fact that people said it and nobody else would disagree with them, and they say, yeah, that's right, you know, shows that it was a very commonly held view. Right today, though, we're suffering from deflation. We have downward pressure on prices, and taxes are at a historically low level. This year, federal total federal taxes are only 14.9% of GDP. That's the lowest level since the 1940s. I mean, if taxes as a share of GDP is the be-all and end-all of growth, we should be booming. So I think the idea that lowering taxes even more is just ridiculous.
So when you propose this to Republicans, do they at least understand what you're saying and say, hey, Bruce, shush, we're trying to win political
No,
contest
I think they
here.
actually believe it. I mean, it amazes me that there's a fairly substantial number of really reputable economists out there, guys with Nobel Prizes, who maintain that not only should we have had no stimulus spending at all, but that we should have slashed tax rates back in February, and that somehow or other that would have gotten the economy growing again. I I'm just incredulous.
I'm incredulous too. I mean, I have to question their motivation because we have overwhelming evidence now. I mean, the last 8 years, all we did was cut taxes, and then we wound up in the worst economic debacle of our lifetimes. Did that not prove
that's exactly
something?
right. I mean, I'm not so sure that those tax cuts caused the debacle, but on the other hand, it is quite clear that even if you discount what happened in 2008, that the growth during the George W. Bush years was very, very subpar. We did much better following the 1993 tax increase that Bill Clinton enacted, and which every single Republican said would lead to total economic disaster, when in fact the economy boomed.
Yeah, and until 2000, when George W. Bush came in, the economy continued to boom. And so when you look at those graphs, and I've been looking at those a lot more lately, Bruce, as to when the taxes are at a certain rate and where the economy is, right? I began to question my assumptions because when I would say that I'm almost in the same exact boat as you are, right? I was a Republican earlier, and I was in favor of Reagan and George H.W. Bush, et cetera. But but we do a progressive show here, and I think the Republicans lost their minds, et cetera. So I'm certainly not in that camp anymore. But
well, I would just add that I no longer consider myself to be a Republican. I consider myself to be an independent, and I do believe you're right that the Republican Party is brain dead. It's Glenn Beck is the face of the mind of the Republican Party, and that's too scary to contemplate, really.
It's depressing if you're a Republican, if you understand anything. We're talking to Bruce Bartlett. He's the author of The New American Economy, The Failure of Reaganomics, and A New Way Forward, and he worked in the Reagan and George H.W. Bush administrations. So what I was going to say is, though, a lot of our listeners have been sending me information, and it's all it is facts on how the economy did under different circumstances. And an interesting fact arises when you look at those graphs, which is America did great when we had tax rates anywhere between 70 to 91%. I mean, what the conservatives call the golden era of America, we had enormous taxes on the highest brackets. And honestly, Bruce, I'm at a loss to explain that. What's your sense of that?
A big part of it is that the brackets were much different back then. You hit the top rate at a much higher level of income. I mean, it's one thing to pay 70% or 91% on the 10 millionth dollar you earn. It's quite another if you're paying it on the 101st thousand dollar. So the income thresholds are very, very critical to analyze the structure of taxation.
That's absolutely true. But for the richest Americans, and there were gigantically rich people back then, of course, as well, they would take up to 90% of their income above, let's say in these dollars, about $10 million. If you did that now, I would imagine that the heads of every Republican in the country would explode, even though they don't make the $10 million, right?
Well, there's another thing to keep in mind as well, and that is the richer you are, the more likely it is that virtually all of your income is in the form of capital gains or dividends. And from the late 1930s until 1969, there was an alternative capital gains maximum tax rate of 25%. And right now, the capital gains rate is only 15%, and Obama has proposed increasing that, but only to 20%. So even if he raises the top rate, as he says he's going to, it's not really going to have much of an effect on the people at the high end. It's really just window dressing.
So, that leads us to the problems with Obama, right? So you have that issue, which is it's what I call 5% change. It's another part of the financial regulations where he's asking companies to keep 5% of the loans that they make, which is comical. And in this case, you go from 15 to 20%, another 5% change. And then last week we saw that he had said in the campaign that he was going to close a tax loophole, and then he proposed it as president. And then the banking lobby and the corporate lobby got in there, and they withdrew it last week, saying, okay, never mind, we're going to let them keep their offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and not do a damn thing about it. So are we underestimating how compromised the Democratic Party in this White House is?
Well, I think this idea that Obama is a Marxist and the most left-wing president in our history is just ludicrous. I mean, I think the conservatives are just, crazy. If they would read progressive websites, as I do, you'd see that there's been simmering, frustration with Obama on those issues that you mentioned, and a great many others, such as why is he sending more troops to Afghanistan? This seems insane to me. Why has he not gotten rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell? I mean, these things strike me as I mean, these are things he could do himself. He doesn't need to get Congress to pass a law. He's made these decisions, and I think they're bad decisions.
I'm positive that the reaction that you'll get, Bruce, is from Republicans and present-day conservatives is, this Bruce Bartlett guy was never one of us anyway, right? But you did work in the Reagan White House, and you did work for George H.W. Bush. Is it you, or is it the Republican Party that's changed so much?
Well, I think the party has changed a lot. I think it's really gone off the deep end, and what's worse, from my point of view, is that the entire conservative movement, such as it is, has become a wholly owned subsidiary of the Republican Party. I mean, once upon a time, they were separate. You had Republicans, and then you had conservatives, and they worked together, and there was some overlap, but there were distinctive, entities. Now they are one and the same, and what passes for conservative thought these days is pure partisan posturing. They just figure out what the Republican line of the day is, and that becomes the conservative line of the day. And I think that I'm consistent in being a conservative, and that's everybody else who's wrong.
We're talking to Bruce Bartlett, the author of The New American Economy and the Failure of Reaganomics and a New Way Forward. Well, now we would have, progressives on the other side saying, hey, wait a minute, you claim that you were right during the Reagan and Bush years, but didn't they do, a lot of things, putting aside foreign policy, on the domestic front that were not helpful, okay, did not address, forget Don't Ask, Don't Tell. A lot of people would say they didn't address some civil rights issues, right, et cetera, et cetera. Do you still believe that Reagan and Bush...
budget and tax issues, that's my expertise. I mean, I'll still defend what Reagan did, and frankly, I was not entirely thrilled with the budget deal of 1990, where George H.W. Bush, broke his tax pledge, and I was working for him at the Treasury Department at the time. But with the benefit of hindsight, I can see that the tough spending controls and pay-go that were put in place by that legislation were probably as much, or if not more, responsible for the surpluses of the 1990s as anything that Clinton did. And so I think that those two presidents are very much and I think Clinton is very much underrated as well. But I think that what Bush did is not consistent with what Reagan and his father did, and I think both progressives and conservatives make a mistake in trying to jam him into the same a square peg, the same peg into the same hole, because I think they're vastly different. And I tried to explain those differences in an earlier book I wrote called Imposter, How George W. Bush Bankrupted America and Betrayed the Reagan Legacy. So
real quick, I'm going to ask you one last question on that. Look, on the George H.W. Bush thing, I agree with you. He knew he was going to do a political, it's tough to say political suicide, but certainly do himself a lot of political damage by raising taxes, but he did it anyway because he thought it was the right thing for the country, and that took a lot of guts. But on Reagan, do you still believe in the trickle-down theory?
Well, I never thought it was trickle-down theory. I thought it was, I think it was supply-side economics. It was about restoring incentives, about giving people the incentive to work, save, and invest, and expand the supply side of the economy. And I think it demonstrably worked. Remember that back in 1980, the top, inflation was up in the 18, 19, 20% range, as were interest rates, and most economists said it would take decades to get the economy out of that mess. We were out of it within a couple of years. By 1983, inflation was virtually gone. I mean, by the standard, by what most economists thought in 1980, that was a miracle, and it was a very powerful one. And I think it tends to get underrated. People just somehow or other forget that inflation disappeared under Reagan.
I'd love to put you up against a progressive economist on that issue, because I'm fascinated by that, and I'm And I really have an open mind on that on both sides. But it's a very interesting conversation. We really appreciate you coming on, Bruce.
Okay, thank you.
And everybody remember, Bruce Bartlett's book is The New American Economy, The Failure of Reaganomics and a New Way Forward. Young Turks.